Hi guys, welcome back to the Twits. Today we are going to be reading chapters 11, 12, and 13. Chapter 11. Mrs. Twit goes ballooning up. "There's enough pull here to take me to the moon," Mrs. Twit cried out. "To take you to the moon?" exclaimed Mr. Twit. "What a ghastly thought! We wouldn't want anything like that to happen. Oh dear me, no." "We most certainly wouldn't," cried Mrs. Twit. "Put some more string around my ankles quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe." "Very well, my angel," said Mr. Twit, and with a ghoulish grin on his lips, he knelt down at her feet. He took a knife from his pocket, and with one quick slash, he cut through the strings holding Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. She went up like a rocket. "Help!" she screamed. "Save me!" But there was no saving her now. In a few seconds, she was high up in the blue sky and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood below, looking up. "What a pretty sight," he said to himself. "How lovely all those balloons look in the sky, and what a marvellous bit of luck for me. At last that old hag is lost and gone forever." What do you think the word ghoulish means? Now, this is a bit of a tricky one, so I'm going to help you out. So I'm going to get my pen so I can show you where the word ghoulish is. So here is the word ghoulish, a ghoulish grin. And what we're going to do is we're going to read around that word to try to figure out what the word means. So let's go back here. "Very well, my angel," said Mr. Twit, with a ghoulish grin on his lips. He knelt down at her feet. Now let's think. Very well, my angel. Is he saying that in a nice way or not a nice way? Let's think about what kind of personality Mr. Twit has. So he's not a very nice person. The next thing. He took a knife from his pocket, and with one quick slash, he cut through the strings holding Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. So he just did a really bad thing. He just cut Mrs. Twit off. Cut the strings off Mrs. Twit that were holding her down, and then she's gone up. So he was smiling, because we know he was smiling because it says the word grin. So he was smiling, he was grinning, but was he grinning in a nice way or not a nice way? So that's what I want you to think about. What does the word ghoulish mean? Have a think, then pause the video, and then write your answer. And this is the picture here of Mrs. Twit. So the strings have just been cut and she's going flying straight into the sky. Chapter 12. Mrs. Twit comes ballooning down. Mrs. Twit may have been ugly, and she may have been beastly, but she was not stupid. High up there in the sky, she had a bright idea. "If I can get rid of some of these balloons," she said to herself, "I will stop going up and start coming down." She began biting through the strings that held the balloons to her wrists and arms and neck and hair. Each time she bit through a string and let the balloon float away, the upward pull got less and her rate of climb slowed down. So let's think about what that means. So she has all these balloons attached to her and she's floating up into the sky. Then she starts biting away at the strings that are attaching her to the balloons. And as she bites one, that balloon flies away. And as she bites another, that balloon flies away. And as the balloons are like chewed off of her, she slowly kind of starts floating down, down, down. When she had bitten through 20 strings, she stopped going up altogether. She stayed still in the air. She bit through one more string. Very, very slowly, she began to float downwards. It was a calm day. There was no wind at all. And because of this, Mrs. Twit had gone absolutely straight up. She now began to come absolutely straight down. As she floated gently down, Mrs. Twit's petticoat billowed out like a parachute, showing her long knickers. It was a grand sight on a glorious day, and thousands of birds came flying in from miles around to stare at this extraordinary old woman in the sky. If Mrs. Twit floated straight up and then straight back down, where is she going to eventually land? Pause the video now to write your answer. And this is the picture of Mrs. Twit attached to her balloons, and when she got there, she's got her walking stick. Chapter 13. Mr. Twit gets a horrid shock. What do you think his shock is going to be? Mr. Twit, who thought he had seen his ugly wife for the last time, was sitting in the garden celebrating with a mug of beer. Silently, Mrs. Twit came floating down. When she was about the height of the house above Mr. Twit, she suddenly called out at the top of her voice, "Here I come, you grisly old grunion, you rotten old turnip, you filthy old frumpet!" Mr. Twit jumped as though he'd been stung by a giant wasp. He dropped his beer. He looked up. He gaped. He gasped. He gurgled. A few choking sounds came out of his mouth. "Ah!" he said. "Ah! Ouch!" "I'll get you for this!" shouted Mrs. Twit. She was floating right down on top of him. She was purple with rage and slashing the air with her long walking stick, which she had somehow managed to hang on to all the time. "I'll swish you to a swazzle," she shouted. "I'll swash you to a swizzle. I'll gnash you to a nozzle. I'll nosh you to a nazzle." And before Mr. Twit had time to run away, this bundle of balloons and petticoats and fiery fury landed right on top of him, lashing out with the stick and cracking him all over his body. She was purple with rage. Does this mean that she was annoyed, upset, or furious? So all three of these words are a bad feeling, but they're like different levels of being of a bad feeling. They're different levels of being angry. If she was purple with rage, was she annoyed, upset, or furious? Which one do you think? Pause the video now to write your answer. To be continued, we will read chapters 14, 15, and 16 on another day. Bye, everyone.